Hello, today we are diving into the critical issue, the increase in domestic abuse during big sporting events. This weekend, like many of you, I watched the Euro Cup finals. The emotions around England's loss to Spain were intense, highlighting the urgency of this topic. I recently recorded a conversation with Sunita Anderson about the alarming trends. Given the timing, I wanted to release this now while the topic is still fresh in everyone's mind. Let's explore the insights Sunita shared and shed some light on this important issue. Welcome to The Secrets in the Powder Room, where we share stories and open up conversations about all the secrets women are forced to keep out of fear and shame. I'm Louise Bryant, professional certified coach, intuitive eating counsellor, and trauma-informed domestic abuse specialist and survivor. We're here to support you on your healing journey and help you feel like you're not alone. This is not to be a replacement of your own professional, medical, or legal advice. This podcast contains adult language and content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, Sunita. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, Louise. Thank you. Thank you for having me on here today.
You're very, very welcome. It's lovely to have you here. I'm really excited to get into our topic that obviously is really important and really current as we are currently in the Euro Cup finals.
We are. So, that is in itself is really brilliant, good news. But we are going to be looking at the flip side of that today, aren't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we get started, can we start maybe by covering what we mean by domestic abuse and violence?
Of course, because it means so many different things to different people. So domestic violence, or more specifically, intimate partner violence, is a global issue. Some might even say it's an epidemic where the behavior of that person or even an ex-partner causes physical, sexual, or psychological harm. And this includes aggression, assaults, but also coercion. So that's doing something that you might not want to choose to do, including sex. Controlling behaviors cover so many areas, such as financial, mental abuse, who you phone, meet, or email. And the list is long, and terms like gaslighting and stonewalling come in there commonly too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So can you maybe explain why there's a rise in domestic abuse in instances around big sporting events?
For sure. There's a lot of aggression condoning social and leisure settings like sports, and they exacerbate males' dominating moods. And violence in sports have been linked for well over 20 years in research, particularly in team contact sports. And they promote an acceptance to behave bullish and with hostility. And many sports coaches, they see violence as a key to being successful. So if you think about boxing games where they're geeing up the boxer before a fight, it's all very aggressive. It's all a lot of deriding talk about the opponent. And this blurs the boundary between what is just for sport and what is personal behavior.
And so sort of that affecting obviously the person watching as well, because that can have like a mirrored effect. Yeah.
It definitely does. It normalizes all of that. And it is not just the athletes, it is those watching, it is the audience too, because they want to emulate their stars, the people they're supporting. They have this connection with the person that they're supporting, and their moods heighten in line with the importance of the game or the match. And irrational passions and things like team rivalry flare them up stronger. Fans become highly charged, emotional, and volatile.
Yeah. And that's just without, the domestic abuse. That's just generally, isn't it, as well?
That is just generally. It is part of what people enjoy about sports, but it's back to that blurred line again of when you cross it and it goes too far.
So is it just women that do you think that are at risk of this?
Sadly, no. But because sports is traditionally such a male-dominated area, it does conjure up this behavior in the sporting environments more, where women are on the receiving end. But it generally, the fairest thing to say, it is where a stronger partner takes out aggression in the wrong ways with a weaker partner. There are an increasing number of men falling victim to domestic abuse, reporting the crime.
Yeah.
And then there's the children, both on the receiving end as well as witnessing. And there's trauma and behavior issues that come off the back too. So they are also victims.
So you mentioned the boxing. What other specific sport events have been shown to increase domestic abuse?
Domestic abuse increase has been seen across the board and across the world. So from English Premier League football to the Melbourne Cup horse racing in Australia. There are some sports where it's notably absent, though. Some reports are even lower. Those sports include Wimbledon, tennis championships across the world, golfing tournaments, and believe it or not, Formula One.
Yes.
Formula One also shows lower incidences of reports and hospital entries as well. But Lancashire University did a study and they showed that football, for some reason, there's football, and it could even be Aussie rules football or American NFL. There's something about football where there is absolutely a correlation to the numbers increasing.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you've got rugby, which is quite aggressive on the pitch, but doesn't seem to cause as much aggression from the spectators. And football, it's less aggressive on the pitch, but more aggressive in the spectators.
It just goes to show it's not so logical, is it?
Yeah.
There's something which is still being studied now. In Australia, there's a big tournament called State of Origin, which is a rugby style tournament. And they see every year about on average of 40% increase in domestic reported cases every year, every time that they have that tournament. So the numbers are high. It's not just that the numbers increase, the numbers are high.
And that's just the reported ones, isn't it?
That's the key word, reported, yes.
The ones that aren't reported as well, that we don't hear about, that are just going on. It's interesting you should say that, because I was having a bit of a think about, with my ex-abusive relationship, he was very into football, and my current husband we don't watch the football, but every time, like last night, we turned the football on to see the result, and just that sound coming in from the other room. So he turned it on, I was in the kitchen, but just that sound of the crowd just brought an automatic, that fight or flight response just came up in me, like it triggered me. Like, I know I'm safe. I don't have probably enough exposure to have dealt with that yet, because we don't watch the football, but it still has that trigger. Yet motor racing, because my dad used to watch motor racing, and if we've got a roast dinner cooking and the motor racing sound of them cars is a real comfort to me, of bringing me back to a good time in my childhood. So it's interesting, isn't it, that where you said, like, the actual statistics and the studies show how these things are increase and decrease, and how they have then kind of trigger responses as well.
The trigger responses is quite a good way of saying it, because it is this prickly feeling of anxiety and anxiousness that creeps up. And I think it's the anticipation. And to me, it seems a bit nonsensical, because you think watching somebody driving a car at high speed should have you literally on the edge of your seat and not sitting back relaxed and comfortably. Whereas watching some, very simply, people will tell me off for describing it this way, watching men running around in a field, you'd imagine that surely shouldn't charge you up as much, but yet it is the flip, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And what about alcohol consumption during the sporting occasions? That obviously also increases with domestic abuse, doesn't it?
Well, alcohol alone is not the reason. It's an easy one to point the finger to and blame. It's almost the icing on the cake when coupled with the emotions of the salient games, the important games, and team rivalry. It is more about the emotional connection with the sport. But of course, when you had increased consumption of alcohol, you are looser in your behavior, and you are losing conscious control of your actions as well. But all it's doing is giving way to something that has already been rising within you. So another way to look at it is that the person has almost like a primal need to assert themselves, and alcohol is just helping them along the way with a bit of permission. Again, there were some studies done with key sports, but key like local sporting events where alcohol wasn't served or part of the equation. And they did notice that there were increased reports of attacks, and that's without alcohol being on the menu, as it were. So it's a partner, but it's not the reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, sometimes I've heard women say in my work that, oh, he's only abusive when he's drinking. But it's like giving them that okay to go ahead and be abusive, isn't it? It isn't a reason why someone is abusive. It's because they're drinking, they're abusive, they're drinking, and it switches that switch, doesn't it? Of going, well, I don't care now. I've had a drink and I'm going to be abusive.
Sadly, it does. Yes.
What about sort of some that maybe have put gambling bets on a certain race or a certain team to win, and then not only are their team losing, but there's also the financial loss if they haven't won that can then make them.
Well, there is that, and that also causes people's anxieties and worries to flare up. It's all the negative behaviors rising to the surface. But it is almost like an addiction when you are this connected to a sporting event that it matters to you that much, whatever the outcome is. It is also part of the research findings that if you win, it doesn't mean that there isn't any violence. There is less reported cases if a team wins than if they lose or draw, but there is still an increase. It's just the whole event on the whole that spurs it up.
Yeah, the atmosphere, isn't it?
It is.
And it's interesting to sort of look and seeing stuff on social media at the moment of like these big signs saying he's coming home. And it's that feeling, I remember that feeling too well, is that doesn't matter. They've been out drinking, they've been out with their friends, they've been all, like you say, all geared up and, feisty in the pub, whether they win or lose, they're still going to come and have that excuse, aren't they, home to.
Yes, and any survivor would know that feeling. I know this feeling really well, that walking on eggshells sensation, the nervousness of knowing, of listening out for the key and the lock in the door. It's not pleasant at all. And usually, sadly, it's not unfounded either.
Yeah.
You've got reason to feel worried.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's sometimes, well, it's that hangover afterwards, isn't it? For me, it was like the next day of having spent all their money and bought all the drink and bought all the whatever goes along with the drink. And then that hangover, no money. And that tends to sometimes be.
You're so right, because there is an 11% lag effect. They call it the next day, the day after, of increased numbers as well. So they'll see a surge on the day or within the first 24 hours, but then within the next 48 hours, there will be a follow-on effect.
So what does domestic violence under the influence of sports look like? How can we recognise it?
So let's remind ourselves that domestic violence is against the law. So it's not just bad behaviour, it's actually criminal behaviour. There's no forgiveness for how this is displayed or how this comes out, because it's just wrong on every count. And the raised emotions, so what it looks like is the raised emotions at this time give way to a dominating behaviour. The primal need to conquer and be king of something, that no matter what the cost is. In a way, it's like a Neanderthal style of proving manliness physically. So everything from talking, so signs would include talking aggressively to the physical punching and beating up someone is on the menu. Sexual attacks will be in there too, often, again, unreported if within an existing relationship. Some women or partners, they find it difficult to say the difference. Well, we are married, we are together, we are a couple. But I think it's about digging deep to understand what is normal and what is not normal, what feels pleasant and what is totally not your choosing. And that will help to understand the difference between what is okay behavior and what is not.
Yeah, I mean, there can be some sort of like almost pseudo behavior as well, where they kind of go into themselves and maybe not talk to somebody. Like there's the things that are outwards that you can see, but there's also that stuff that maybe you can see but other people can't see. Like he's wound up inside. What's next? And that kind of waiting, isn't it? And him not telling them what's going on, that anger that's kind of inside. And then it's like you're treading on eggshells, waiting for it to, you know, something's going to happen, but it's just a case of waiting.
The water's bubbling and boiling, and it's just about to go, boil over, as it were. I think it's being tuned into those signs. Every person is different, and you've got to trust that you know who you're with and read those signs in them to know, and also know what their connection is with the game. Because just to strengthen the point, this is not a done and dusted behavior for everyone watching a game. Plenty people happily watch all sorts of sports and events without any harm or issue and completely enjoy it in a safe and comfortable way, as it's meant to be. But it is the few, and I think if a person knows what their partner is like, a person knows how attached and how reactive they can be, they can preempt what might happen next.
Yeah, it's really important.
Be on guard.
Exactly, and making sure that they're protecting yourself, if anyone needs to protect themselves and they know this could potentially be happening, it's about maybe setting up some sort of system that can keep you protected. I know for me, I would go to my mum's, because it would be...
That's a really good way. Yes, just remove yourself from the situation.
Yeah. So you do have, it wouldn't stop him sometimes. I would still come round to my mum's and do that, but I still had the protection of other people as opposed to being at home on my own. So this might sound a bit obvious, but what exactly are the effects of the victim when they've been abused or assaulted in these situations?
Like you say, there are obvious effects, especially when physically harmed. You can see the damage, and the damage and the pain will vary with the degree of injury. Survivors face a medley of other health consequences, including depression, heightened anxiety and nervousness, PTSD, sexual health effects, which range from damage to STDs. We mentioned children too. Disrupted development and antisocial or introverted behaviors can result. And there's a link to higher child suicides from homes with domestic violence and abuse. Horrifically, in the UK, certainly 5 women per week are reported to die from domestic violence related injuries. So note that word again, reported. So who knows what the unknown, undeclared ones would be. So gosh, Louise, this is so very sobering, but unfortunately all factually true. And I'm glad you asked that question, because it shows the importance of us needing to know what this correlation is with sporting events and what we can do about it.
Yeah. And also, if you're aware of a friend or family member who might be going through domestic abuse, it's also being able to support that person, isn't it? And know that you can maybe offer something or some sort of help or just some understanding, or maybe just keep a watchful eye that person may be going through something.
Oh, you're so right again, because this isn't all on the person who might be victim, who might be subjected to it. There's a saying that it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes, we extend that further. We are our community, and you'd like to think that someone would watch over you in the same way as watching out for other people.
Absolutely. And do you think can you think of maybe some warning signs or patterns that loved ones can look for during these events to prevent or be there and be supportive in a domestically abusive situation?
Recognizing it is a case of knowing what would be rational behavior versus not. And you gave a really great example just now about taking yourself to your mum's. The key advice is not to engage as best you can and to remove yourself from a preempted situation, if at all possible. There is safety in numbers. Of course, we've just spoken also about the lag effect. So be aware that what might not happen in the moment could still happen a little later on. So you want to allow for a simmering down period as well. I would say don't engage in a discussion about the match or the game. Just let that be, especially if the result didn't go their way.
And do you think there's any way that communities or maybe organisations could provide better support for the victims of abuse during these big major sporting events?
Time over, a lot of certainly in the UK and actually in other countries too, they have tried to put together campaigns in advance to tackle this. So in 2022, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, he put together a big campaign called Have a Word with Your Mates, and about being respectful towards women. It was all domestic. It wasn't so much sporting, it was more domestic violence focused, but they did heighten the campaign when it was the World Cup at that time too. But it's since fizzled out and gone away. And it was very, very capital focused. If you weren't in and around the London area, you may not have even seen any part of that campaign. In Australia, they're trying to make a national legislation around alcohol. I know we spoke that that's not the big perpetrator or the big responsibility, but it's a start. And they're trying to approach alcohol at sporting events in much the same way as tobacco, and let it just go dark and disassociate alcohol with sporting events, which of course will not go down well with the drinks companies who try to increase consumption through association, but then they need to take a responsibility there too.
Absolutely. I did a podcast on a Sober Curious podcast, and she was talking about the only part of alcohol that's actually growing is the non-alcohol part. So, encouraging more of them non-alcoholic beers. You can still get that kind of feel of having a non-alcoholic beer, or a non-alcoholic gin and tonic. But it's kind of getting them on board, isn't it? So
it is getting them on board, but it is possible because, decades ago, they used to be able to take their glass pints into stadiums. They've moved away to the plastics. They've moved away from that to you can't even take the plastics into the stadium. So slowly, I mean, I think it is happening right under our noses. It just needs to go another level further, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. But do you think there's any roles that sports teams and the athletes could play in addressing domestic abuse, maybe related to their sporting events?
Absolutely, because they are the ones that the supporters look up to. And major bodies, rather than individuals, I think are the ones who should really take ownership of this. Things like the Lawn Tennis Association, well, as we said, they don't really give drive to domestic violence, but maybe they can help to demonstrate how they don't have domestic violence so prolific within their sporting areas. Look to them. What is it that they're doing? Why is it some sports are not others? Can we learn from the ones where it's absent? And then the boards like FIFA and national rugby leagues in NFL across America, they can then look and start to implement some more responsible steps, maybe some more fervent marketing around the time, maybe more present conversations about violence and the wrong in it. I also feel it shouldn't just be at sporting times, because then you're creating that link with the sporting event. I think they should try and make this a much more everyday and general awareness.
Absolutely. And as we in the UK step into a new Labour government, it'll be interesting to see how they tackle domestic abuse. Is there any way that we can educate the public about the connections?
I think when you ask people what domestic violence is, the vast majority, if they haven't been exposed to it like you and I have, they will understand it as something that is physical, visible violence, which is only a teeny weeny subset of what domestic violence is. And I think the thing to do here is to grow the awareness of what really falls under that umbrella, what really is this criminal behavior, what and where the right and wrong is. Knowing to help them to know the difference. Say in the reverse situation, a lot of the men I speak to, they have this struggle. When is it that their wife is nagging them versus being abusive to them? And that will only come through greater awareness of where that line in the sand is.
Absolutely. I think that's it. It's key is educating. And a lot of, nowadays we as professionals are taught to say not domestic violence, but domestic abuse, because people, like you say, assume that everything that's domestic is violent and it's the bruises and it's the hits. But sometimes that coercive control and the gaslighting and all the other things that come in can be just as damaging. and almost harder for somebody to leave because they haven't been hit. They don't get that support from certain services because they're not in, quote, danger, unquote.
And difficult to prove.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So with all of this, how can people connect with you and work with you or find out more information about what you do?
So I would love people to read my current blog out, which does cover this topic on violence within football. And my blog is available on my website, quite simply, sunitaanderson.com, where you can also sign up for newsletters and as well as keeping up to date with anything related to domestic violence and toxic relationships in general. I include toxic relationships because, as you know, a lot of people are in denial that they are actually in a domestic violent situation, but they can recognize that the relationship they're in is toxic in some way. So I would urge people to go there to request any extra information where seen on the site, to just grow their awareness, because if not for themselves, somebody else they know around them could do with their help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's key, isn't it? If you know somebody who's going through abuse, who you suspect is going through abuse, sometimes it's just letting them know that you know and you're there, and not try and get them to leave, because leaving an abusive relationship is very hard. It's really hard.
It's tough and lonely, which is, to your point, where you need that extra support. The value of that extra support is there's no measure to that. And I'm also on Instagram, so please do follow me on sunitaanderson.live. Keep up to date with posts and comments and information there.
Yeah, and I'll put all of the links in the show notes so people can connect with you, and it will be on the blog as well.
Thank you so much.
So we will definitely come together again. Thank you so much for coming and talking about this topic. I know we've just kind of brought this together because of the current situation, and we want to give this information as quick as possible, but we will definitely be doing other podcasts in the future on different topics around domestic abuse. So I'll love to have you on here again.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you.
It would be my pleasure too. So thank you.
Take care, keep safe and keep well. Until soon.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to this episode of Secrets in the Powder Room with me, Louise Bryant. I hope you found our discussion insightful as we shed some light on domestic abuse during major sporting events. Please subscribe and leave a rating, as this helps others to find the podcast. And if you found this conversation valuable, please be sure to check out our other episodes, including our in-depth look at supporting loved ones through domestic abuse and how to spot the signs of abuse. And don't forget, you can sign up to my free 14-day self-care challenge this August. It's a great way to prioritise your well-being and take those first steps towards healing. Stay safe, stay strong, and remember, you're not alone. See you next time.